She was suspended mid-air, between death and life. But he chose to save her. The rope snapped with a sound like a gunshot. Katie felt herself drop, her fingers clawing at empty air as the canyon floor rushed up to meet her. 300 feet of nothing but wind and terror separated her from the rocks below. Then the second rope caught, jerking her to a brutal stop that knocked the breath from her lungs. She hung there, spinning slowly in the desert wind, her vision blurring at the edges. Above her, Jake leaned over the cliff edge, his face pale against the bright sky. His horse had spooked during the river crossing, sending Katie's mount into a panic that drove her straight toward the canyon. She had jumped clear, but her foot caught in the stirrup rope, and now she dangled like a broken puppet while her terrified horse scrambled on the ledge above. Jake's hands worked fast, tying off his own rope to a boulder. He could hear voices behind him. The men chasing them were close now, maybe 5 minutes away. He had a choice that burned in his gut like poison. Cut Katie loose and ride hard, maybe escape with his life, or stay and pull her up, knowing the gunman would catch them both. The saddlebags on his horse carried $50,000 in gold certificates, stolen from a train depot in Silver Creek. Katie had been the clerk who opened the safe, feeding him information for months. They were supposed to meet at the ridge, take the money, and disappear into Mexico. But everything had gone wrong when the depot manager came back early. Katie had to shoot him, and now half the territory wanted them dead. Jake wrapped the rope around his waist and started pulling. Katie's weight felt like an anchor dragging him toward the edge. His boots scraped against loose gravel, searching for purchase on the rocky ground. Sweat poured down his face despite the cool morning air. Every muscle in his back screamed as he hauled her up inch by inch. The sound of hoofbeats echoed across the canyon. 4 riders appeared on the eastern trail, their horses kicking up dust clouds. Jake recognized the lead rider, a marshal named Pete Collins who had tracked outlaws across 3 states. Collins was known for bringing people back alive to face the rope, which somehow seemed worse than a bullet. Katie's hand appeared over the edge. Jake grabbed her wrist and pulled hard, dragging her onto solid ground. She lay gasping, her shirt torn and her face scratched bloody from scraping against the cliff face. There was no time for relief or reunion. Jake pulled her to her feet and shoved her toward his horse. They mounted together, the horse staggering under the double weight. Jake kicked hard and the animal lunged forward, racing along the narrow trail that hugged the canyon rim. Behind them, guns started firing. Bullets whined past their heads, striking sparks off the rocks. Jake leaned low over the horse's neck, feeling Katie's arms tight around his waist. The trail twisted through a maze of red stone pillars. They knew this country, had run cattle through here as a boy before his father drank himself to death and left him with nothing but debts. He guided the horse through gaps barely wide enough for a man, places where the pursuers would have to slow down or risk breaking their necks. They emerged into a dead end, a box canyon with walls too steep to climb. Jake cursed and wheeled the horse around, but Collins and his men were already blocking the exit. The marshal sat calm in his saddle, his rifle aimed steady at Jake's chest. 3 deputies fanned out on either side, their weapons ready. Collins spoke in a voice like gravel. "Step down easy, Jake. You too, girl. Nobody else needs to die today." Jake's hand drifted toward his pistol. Katie's fingers dug into his side, a warning or a plea. He could feel her shaking against his back, could hear her ragged breathing. The math was simple and brutal. 4 armed men against 1 tired cowboy and a woman who could barely stand. Part 2, Jake's mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. The canyon walls rose like prison bars around them, red stone glowing in the morning sun. His horse stood with its head low, sides heaving from the hard run. Collins and his deputies waited with the patience of men who knew they had won. Katie slid off the horse first. Her legs nearly buckled when she hit the ground, but she steadied herself against the animal's flank. Her dark hair had come loose from its braid, hanging wild around her face. There was a hardness in her eyes that had not been there 3 months ago when she was just a depot clerk with a dream of something better. Jake dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. His pistol felt heavy on his hip, a useless weight. Collins nudged his horse forward a few steps, the rifle never wavering. The marshal was maybe 50 years old, with a weathered face that had seen too much sun and too much blood. He wore a long coat despite the heat, and a silver star pinned to his vest caught the light. "Smart choice," Collins said. "Now unbuckle that gun belt." "Let it drop." Jake's fingers moved to the buckle, then stopped. His eyes caught something behind the deputies, a flicker of movement among the rocks. At first he thought it was a heat shimmer, but then he saw it again. A rider, maybe 2, moving through the boulders on the canyon's western slope. They were positioning themselves above the posse, which meant they were not lawmen. "You hear me, Jake?" Collins asked, his voice sharper now. "Drop the gun." I hear you fine, Jake said, stalling for time. His mind worked to identify the newcomers. Could be anyone in this lawless territory. Outlaws, bounty hunters, or worse. But then he remembered something Katie had mentioned during their planning. Her brother Danny ran with a gang that operated out of the Badlands. She had said they might help if things went bad, but Jake had dismissed it as wishful thinking. Katie must have seen them too, because she shifted her weight, readying herself. Jake caught her eye and saw understanding there. She gave the smallest nod. Last warning, Collins said, and Jake heard the hammers click back on the deputies' rifles. The first shot came from above, striking the deputy on the left. The man fell from his saddle without a sound. Chaos erupted in the canyon. Collins swung his rifle toward the rocks, returning fire. His remaining deputies scattered, their horses rearing and screaming. Jake drew his pistol and fired twice, hitting one deputy in the shoulder and sending him tumbling backward. Katie ran for cover behind a fallen boulder. Jake fired again, keeping Collins pinned down while riders poured down from the slopes. There were 5 of them, all young men with hard faces and dusty clothes. They came in shooting, their revolvers cracking like strings of firecrackers. Collins tried to rally his men, but it was hopeless. One deputy was already dead, another wounded, and a third was running for his life down the trail. The marshal himself took a bullet in the leg and went down, his horse bolting away across the canyon floor. Within 30 seconds, the fight was over. The lead rider dismounted and walked toward Jake. He was maybe 25, with Katie's same dark eyes and sharp cheekbones. Danny Morrison looked nothing like the boy Katie had described from her childhood stories. Prison and hard living had turned him into something cold and dangerous. "You must be the famous Jake," Danny said, his voice thick with sarcasm. "My sister's big rescue." "Danny," Katie said, stepping out from behind a boulder. "You came. Of course, you sent word you needed help." He looked at the chaos around them, at Collins writhing on the ground and the dead deputy sprawled in the dirt. "Looks like you needed it bad." Jake holstered his gun, his hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "We're grateful. We had a plan, but everything went wrong." "Plans usually do," Danny said. He walked over to Collins and kicked the marshal's rifle away. "This one's still breathing. We should finish him." "No," Katie said quickly. "He's done." "Let him be." Danny laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "You gone soft, sister?" This man would have hung you without blinking. But he did not shoot. Instead, he turned back to his gang. "Strip them horses. Take anything useful. We ride in 5 minutes." Jake moved to retrieve the saddlebags from his horse. The gold certificates were still there, pressed tight against the leather. It was more money than most men saw in a lifetime. Enough to start over somewhere far from here. But as he lifted the bags, he felt the weight of what they had cost. A depot manager dead, men killed in this canyon, and Katie transformed from an innocent clerk into a fugitive killer. Danny appeared at his shoulder. "That the score Katie told me about?" "Half of it's hers," Jake said firmly. "I know the deal. You two take your share and disappear. We get a cut for the rescue." Danny's eyes were flat and calculating. But plans changed, Jake. "You understand that, right?" Jake's hand moved toward his gun, but Danny was faster. He pressed his revolver against Jake's ribs, hidden from view of the others. His smile did not reach his eyes. "Easy now," Danny said softly. "We're all friends here, but let's be clear about how this works. My sister might trust you, but I don't trust nobody. So here's what's going to happen. You're riding with us to our camp in the Badlands. We'll divide the money there, fair and square. Then you and Katie can go wherever you want. But if you try anything stupid, if you even think about running with that gold, I'll put a bullet in you myself." Sister's feelings be damned. Katie approached them, her face tight with worry. "Danny, what are you doing?" "Just making sure everyone understands the arrangement," Danny said, pulling the gun away from Jake's ribs. "Your boyfriend here was about to agree to come back to camp with us. Right, Jake?" Jake met Katie's eyes and saw the fear there. She knew her brother, knew what he was capable of. They had jumped from the law's frying pan straight into a fire that might burn even hotter. But what choice did they have? Collins was down but not dead, and more lawmen would come. They needed somewhere to hide, at least for a few days. "Right," Jake said. "We'll ride with you." Danny's smile widened. "Smart man. Load up, people. We got a long ride ahead." They left Collins in the canyon with his dead deputy and his shattered leg. As they rode out, Jake looked back once and saw the marshal dragging himself toward his rifle. The man's eyes burned with a hatred that promised this was not over, not by a long shot. The gang rode hard through the afternoon, following trails that only outlaws and Indians knew. They crossed a dry riverbed, climbed through a pass where the rocks glowed orange in the setting sun, and finally descended into a valley hidden between jagged peaks. The Badlands spread out before them, a maze of canyons and mesas where 100 men could hide for years. Part 3, the outlaw camp sat in a narrow gorge protected on 3 sides by sheer cliffs. A spring bubbled up from the rocks, creating a small pool surrounded by cottonwood trees. Crude shelters made from canvas and stolen lumber dotted the area. Maybe 15 people lived here, a mixture of hardened criminals and desperate folks with nowhere else to go. Children played in the dirt while women stirred pots over cooking fires. It looked more like a refugee camp than a den of thieves. Danny led them to a larger structure near the spring, a cabin built from scavenged wood and stone. Inside, an older man sat at a rough table, cleaning a shotgun. He looked up when they entered, his gray eyes moving from Jake to Katie to the saddlebags. "This them?" "Yeah, Pop. This is Katie and her friend Jake." Danny dropped into a chair, his gun still visible on his hip. "They brought the money, just like she promised." Pop stood slowly, his joints creaking. He was maybe 60, thin and weathered like old leather. His hands were steady as he set down the shotgun. "Katie, girl, been a long time. You were just a kid when the law took Danny away." "Hello, Pop Morrison," Katie said quietly. "Thank you for helping us." "Family helps family," Pop said, but his eyes were on the saddlebags. Even when family makes stupid choices, running off with stolen gold, killing a depot manager. "What were you thinking?" I was tired of being poor," Katie said, and there was steel in her voice now. "Tired of watching rich men get richer while I worked 12 hours a day for pennies." The depot manager was supposed to be gone. He came back early and pulled a gun. "I did what I had to do." Pop nodded slowly. "World's hard on women. Harder on poor women. Can't say I blame you for wanting more." He turned to Jake. "And you? What's your story, cowboy?" Jake set the saddlebags on the table, same as hers. "Tired of breaking my back for nothing. Saw an opportunity and took it." He unbuckled the bags and pulled out the gold certificates, stacking them on the table. $50,000 in neat bundles, each one stamped with official seals. Pop whistled low. "That's real money. The kind that makes men kill their brothers." "We had a deal," Danny said, leaning forward. "Katie gets half. We get 25% of Katie's share for the rescue. That's $12,500 for us, $18,750 each for them." "Math's right," Pop said. "But here's what troubles me. That much gold draws attention. Every bounty hunter and lawman in 3 territories will be looking for it. You two can't just ride into the next town and start spending. They'll hang you before you can blink." Jake had been thinking the same thing. The certificates were traceable, marked with serial numbers that banks would recognize. They needed to convert them to cash or goods, and that required connections they did not have. "We can help with that," Pop said, reading his thoughts. "Got contacts in El Paso who'll exchange those certificates for clean money. They take 40%, which is robbery. But it's better than hanging. That leaves you two with maybe 22,000 between you. Still enough to start over somewhere." "And what do you get out of it?" Jake asked. "Same as Danny. 12,500 plus the satisfaction of helping family." Pop's smile showed tobacco-stained teeth. "And your gratitude, which might be worth something down the line." Katie looked at Jake. They both knew they had no leverage here. Pop and Danny held all the cards, refused the deal, and they could just take the money by force. Accept it, and they might actually get out of this alive. "We'll take it," Jake said. "Good." Pop gathered up the certificates and tucked them into a metal box under the table. "I'll send a rider to El Paso tomorrow. Take about a week to get the exchange done. Meanwhile, you two can rest up here. You look like you could use it." Danny stood. "I'll show them where they can sleep." They followed him out of the cabin and across the camp. People stared as they passed, their faces curious and suspicious. An old woman spat in the dirt at Jake's feet. A young boy pointed at Katie and whispered something to his mother. The weight of being among criminals pressed down on Jake like a physical thing. Danny stopped at a small tent near the edge of camp. "You two can share this. There's blankets inside and a lantern. Food at sunset by the main fire. Don't wander off. Some folks here don't take kindly to strangers, and I can't protect you if you get stupid." "Appreciate the hospitality," Jake said dryly. Danny's face hardened. "You got a smart mouth, cowboy. Might want to watch that. My sister likes you for some reason, but I got no such attachments. You're here on my sufferance, nothing more. Remember that." He walked away, leaving them alone. Katie ducked into the tent and Jake followed. It was cramped and hot inside, barely enough room for 2 people to lie down. The blankets smelled of dust and old sweat. Katie sat heavily on the bedroll, her face in her hands. I'm sorry. I thought Danny would help us, not turn us into prisoners. Jake knelt beside her. We're not prisoners. We're guests who can't leave. There's a difference. He tried to smile, but it felt hollow. We'll get through this. 1 week, then we take our money and go. You really think they'll let us go? Katie looked up, her eyes red. Pop and Danny aren't known for their generosity. Once they have all the money converted, what's to stop them from killing us and keeping everything? It was the question Jake had been avoiding since they arrived. He had no good answer. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in a camp full of outlaws who would not think twice about murder. Their only advantage was Katie's blood connection to Danny, and Jake was not sure how far that would stretch. We need insurance, Jake said slowly. An idea was forming, dangerous but possible. Something that makes us valuable alive. Like what? Information? Leverage? Something they need that only we can provide. He stood and paced the small tent, thinking hard. The certificates came from a train depot. There was more there, wasn't there? More money, more gold. You worked there. You know the schedules, the security, everything. Katie's eyes widened. You want to offer them another job? I want to make ourselves indispensable. If we can set up a bigger score, something that needs our knowledge and planning, they can't kill us. They need us to pull it off. That's insane. We barely survived this one. You want to do it again? I want to stay alive, Jake said firmly. And right now, the best way to do that is to make ourselves useful. We tell Pop about the depot's main vault, the big shipments that come through. We make him see dollar signs so big he forgets about our 12,000. Katie was quiet for a long moment, her mind working. Finally, she nodded. There's a gold shipment coming through next month. Federal Reserve transport heading to the Mint in Denver. It stops at Silver Creek Depot for 1 night, gets locked in the main vault. 200,000 in gold bars. Jake felt his pulse quicken. Can it be taken? Maybe. The vault needs 2 keys to open. The depot supervisor has one, the federal agent has the other. They're both kept in separate safes. Security is tight, but not impossible. She looked at him seriously. But Jake, if we do this, if we set this up for them, we're in deeper than ever. We become part of their gang. There's no walking away clean. We're already in deep, Jake said. Might as well swim for the far shore instead of treading water till we drown. They spent the evening working out the details. Katie drew maps in the dirt, showing the depot layout, guard positions, and timing windows. Jake added his knowledge of the territory, the escape routes, and the places where lawmen would set up ambushes. By the time darkness fell, they had the skeleton of a plan. They found Pop at the main fire, eating beans from a tin plate. Danny sat beside him, along with 3 other men Jake did not know. The conversation died when Jake and Katie approached. Got a minute, Pop? Jake asked. The old man gestured to a log near the fire. Sit. Jake laid it out simply. The gold shipment, the timing, the potential take. $200,000, enough to set up every person in this camp for life. Katie filled in the technical details, her voice steady and professional. By the time they finished, Pop was leaning forward, his plate forgotten. That's a hell of a story, Pop said finally. But it's also a hell of a risk. Federal gold means federal attention. Army, marshals, Pinkertons, they don't stop hunting till they get you. True, Jake admitted, but they're already hunting us for 50,000. What's the difference between being hunted for 50 and being hunted for 200? Either way, we hang if they catch us. Might as well hang rich. Part 4, Pop laughed, a genuine sound that made several people around the fire look up in surprise. I like how you think, Cowboy. Bold and stupid in equal measure. He spat into the fire, watching the sizzle. But you make a fair point. We're already damned. Might as well earn it proper. Danny was less enthusiastic. This smells like a setup. How do we know they're not working with the law? Maybe Collins sent them here to find our camp. Collins is lying in a canyon with a busted leg, one of the other men said. I made sure to put an extra hole in his horse before we left. Even if he survived, he ain't told nobody nothing yet. Still, Danny pressed, 200,000 brings heat we might not want. We got a good thing here, Pop. Safe camp, regular work. Why risk it for one big score? Because one big score means we don't need regular work, Pop said. Means we can split up, head different directions, live like actual human beings instead of rats in a hole. He looked around the fire at the assembled gang members. "How many of you are tired of living like this? Tired of running, hiding, scraping by?" Hands went up around the circle. Men and women who had been driven to outlawry by poverty and desperation, who dreamed of something better. Jake saw the hunger in their faces and knew his gamble had worked. They wanted that gold as badly as he did. Pop made his decision. "We'll do it. But not all of us. Too many people makes for sloppy work. Danny, you pick 5 good men. Katie, you and Jake handle the planning. We got 1 month to get this right. No mistakes, no heroes, no stupidity. We go in clean, we come out rich, and we scatter to the 4 winds before the law knows what hit them." The meeting broke up soon after. Men gathered in small groups, talking excitedly about what they would do with their share. Danny pulled Jake aside, his face dark with suspicion. "You better not be playing us," he said quietly. "'Cause if this goes wrong, if my people get hurt because of you, I'll kill you slow. I don't care what Katie says." "No games," Jake said, meeting his eyes. "I want out of this life as much as anyone. That gold's my ticket." "Our ticket," Katie said, joining them. "And Danny, you need to trust me on this. I wouldn't risk your life for Pop's. This can work." Danny studied them both, then nodded reluctantly. 1 month. Make it count. The next weeks passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Jake rode out with Danny's men, scouting routes and timing guard patrols. Katie worked with Pop, refining the vault approach and identifying weaknesses in the depot's security. They drilled the team relentlessly, practicing coordination and escape procedures until everyone could execute their role blind. Jake learned about the men he would be working with. There was Frank, a former cavalry soldier who had deserted after his family starved while he served. Carlos, a Mexican vaquero run off his land by corrupt officials. Henry and Luke, brothers who had turned to robbery after their ranch burned and the bank refused to extend their loan. And Simon, a quiet man who never spoke about his past but could crack any safe ever made. They were not evil men, Jake realized, just desperate ones who had been pushed beyond their limits by a system that ground up the poor and spit them out. He saw himself in their stories, saw Katie, saw everyone he had ever known who worked themselves to death for nothing. The converted gold arrived from El Paso exactly when Pop promised. 22,000 in clean bills, untraceable and spendable anywhere. Pop divided it according to their agreement, giving Jake and Katie their share. Jake held the money in his hands and felt the weight of what they had sacrificed for it. A man's life. Their own innocence. Any chance at normal existence. "You could run now," Pop said, watching him. "Take that money and ride hard. Be in California in 2 weeks, start fresh, and leave you short-handed for the job?" Jake shook his head. "We made a deal. We see it through." "Honorable for a thief," Pop said with approval. "I like that. Man needs principles even if the law says they're crooked." The day before the job, a rider came into camp at full gallop. It was one of the scouts they had posted along the main trails, a young woman named Beth. Her horse was lathered and trembling, and her face was pale. "Lawmen," she gasped. Maybe 20 of them, led by a marshal on crutches. "They're coming up the canyon trail. Be here in an hour." Collins. The man was tougher than leather and twice as mean. He had somehow survived, somehow tracked them here, and now he was bringing hell with him. Pop moved fast for an old man. "Everyone grab what you can carry. Women and children first. Head for the North Pass. Fighting men, grab rifles and take positions on the ridges. We hold them long enough for the families to get clear." Chaos erupted in the camp. People ran in every direction, snatching up belongings and herding children toward the narrow trail that led north. Jake helped load supplies onto pack horses while Katie organized the evacuation. Danny and his men scrambled up the rocky slopes, finding cover among the boulders. "You two should go," Pop said to Jake and Katie. "This ain't your fight." "Like hell it isn't," Jake said. He checked his pistol and grabbed a rifle from the weapons pile. "Collins is here because of us. We're not running while you die for it." Katie took a rifle as well, her hands steady. "Pop's right that it's our fault. That means it's our responsibility to help fix it." Pop smiled grimly. "You two got spine. I'll give you that." He pointed to the eastern ridge. "Take that position, you'll have a clear field of fire when they come through the narrows. Make every shot count." They climbed quickly, the rocks hot under their hands. From the ridge, Jake could see the whole canyon spread out below. The camp looked small and vulnerable, a collection of desperate dreams about to be crushed by the law's iron fist. Beyond the camp, dust clouds marked the approaching posse. Collins rode at the front, his leg bound up with splints but still in the saddle. The man was a force of nature, driven by a righteousness that would not quit. Behind him came 24 deputies and volunteers, all armed and eager for justice, or revenge. In these territories, the difference was hard to tell. "Hold fire till they're in range," Danny called from across the canyon. "Let them get comfortable, then light 'em up." The posse entered the canyon cautiously, spreading out to cover multiple approaches. They had done this before, knew how to take an outlaw camp without getting massacred in the process, but they were also riding into a prepared ambush, and that changed the math considerably. Collins raised his hand, halting the column. He stood in his stirrups, his voice carrying across the canyon. "People of this camp, you are surrounded and outnumbered. Surrender peacefully, and I guarantee you'll see a fair trial. Resist, and I promise you'll die today. You have 5 minutes to decide." "Go to hell, Collins," Pop shouted back. "We got women and children here. You want to murder them for your pride? I want justice for the depot manager you killed, for the deputies who died protecting the law. Send out Jake and Katie Morrison, and the rest of you can walk away." Jake felt Katie tense beside him. Morrison was her real name, her family name. Collins had done his homework, knew exactly who they were and how to divide them from the gang. It was a smart play, offering the others immunity in exchange for 2 lives. "Don't even think about it," Jake whispered to her. "I'm not," Katie said, but her voice shook slightly. "But others might. 20 people's freedom for 2 fugitives. Some would call that good math." Below, Pop and Danny were arguing, their voices too low to hear, but their gestures clear. The gang was fracturing already, splitting between those who wanted to fight and those who wanted to cut a deal. Collins was breaking them apart without firing a shot. Then someone in the camp panicked and fired early. The shot went wild, missing the posse by yards, but it was enough to end negotiations. Collins shouted an order, and the lawmen opened up with everything they had. Rifle fire echoed through the canyon like thunder. Part 5, Jake fired into the mass of lawmen below, his rifle bucking against his shoulder. He saw a deputy fall, saw horses rearing in panic, saw the careful posse formation dissolve into chaos. Beside him, Katie worked her rifle with mechanical precision, each shot deliberate and aimed. On the opposite ridge, Danny and his men poured fire down onto the attackers, but Collins had planned for resistance. Half his men dismounted and took cover behind rocks, returning fire with disciplined volleys. The other half circled wide, trying to flank the defenders and cut off the escape route. It was textbook tactics, the kind that won battles and killed outlaws. A bullet struck the rock near Jake's head, spraying him with stone chips. He ducked down, reloading quickly. When he raised up again, he saw Collins directing his men from behind a boulder, the marshal's face set in grim determination. The man would not stop, would not quit, would chase them into hell itself if needed. "We can't hold them," Katie said, her voice tight. "There's too many and they're too organized." Jake knew she was right. Already the lawmen were advancing up the slopes, using covering fire to leap from rock to rock. In maybe 5 minutes they would overrun the positions. Pop's plan to buy time for the families was failing. Then Danny did something unexpected and brave. He stood up on the ridge, completely exposed, and fired his rifle one-handed while waving with the other, drawing every eye, every gun. He was making himself a target, pulling focus away from the North Pass where the families were escaping. "Cover him!" Jake shouted. He and Katie poured fire at the lawmen nearest Danny, forcing them to keep their heads down. Other gang members joined in, creating a wall of lead that slowed the advance. But Danny's luck could not hold forever. A rifle cracked from below and Danny jerked backward, blood blooming across his chest. He fell behind the rocks, disappearing from view. Katie screamed, a sound of pure anguish that cut through the gunfire. She started to rise, to run to her brother, but Jake grabbed her and pulled her down. "You can't help him from here. We need to move, now, while they're still pinned." Tears streamed down Katie's face, but she nodded. They scrambled back from the ridge, using the rocks for cover as they worked their way toward the camp. Gunfire still rattled across the canyon, but it was more sporadic now. The gang was breaking, running for their lives. They found Pop near the spring, clutching his shotgun with blood-soaked hands. He had been hit in the side, a bad wound that was leaking his life onto the ground. When he saw them, he managed a weak smile. "Families got clear?" he gasped. "That's something." "Danny?" "He's down," Jake said quietly. Took a rifle shot. Pop closed his eyes, his face twisting with grief. "My boy, my stupid brave boy." He coughed and blood flecked his lips. "You two need to run. Take the horses, take your money. Get out while you can." "We're not leaving you," Katie said. "Yes, you are." Pop's voice gained strength, the last flare of a dying fire. "I'm done, girl. But you got years ahead. Don't waste them dying in this canyon." He fumbled at his belt and pulled out a leather pouch. Emergency fund. 3,000 in gold coins. Take it. Consider it payment for what you're about to do. What's that? Jake asked. Pop's eyes hardened. Kill Collins for me? That man's been a thorn in my side for 20 years. Can't die proper till I know he's dead too. Jake looked at Katie. She nodded slowly, her tears gone, replaced by something cold and focused. They had started this running from the law. Maybe it was time to turn and fight. They left Pop by the spring and moved through the burning camp. Lawmen were everywhere now, arresting survivors and securing the area, but most of the deputies were young and inexperienced, focused on the easy targets. Jake and Katie stayed low, moving through smoke and shadows. They found Collins by the main cabin, directing men to search for the gold. His wounded leg was bleeding again, soaking through the bandages, but he stayed mounted and in command. Jake raised his rifle, sighting on the marshal's back. An easy shot. A killing shot. But Katie put her hand on the barrel, lowering it. Not like that. Not in the back. He doesn't deserve better, Jake said. Maybe not, but we do. She stepped out from cover, her rifle pointed at the ground. Marshal Collins. Collins turned, his hand moving toward his gun, but he stopped when he saw them, a strange expression crossing his face, almost like respect. The Morrison girl. And the cowboy. You should have run when you had the chance. We're done running, Katie said. You want us? Here we are. But just us. Let everyone else go. Collins laughed bitterly. Everyone else is already dead or scattered. This camp is finished. But you're right about one thing. This was always about you two. He dismounted awkwardly, favoring his bad leg. His hand rested on his pistol. So let's finish it proper. Straight draw. Winners walk away. You're serious? Jake asked. A gunfight? That's movie nonsense. It's frontier justice, Collins said, the kind that was here before courtrooms and lawyers. You killed a man during your robbery. You killed my deputies in the canyon. You've earned a bullet, one way or another. At least this way you got a chance. Jake looked at Katie. He could see the calculation in her eyes, weighing odds and options. They were both decent shots, but Collins had decades of experience. He had survived countless fights and outlived better men than them. This was not a fair fight, but it was the only fight they were going to get. All right, Jake said. He handed his rifle to Katie and loosened his pistol in its holster. Just you and me, Marshal. Katie walks away clean. If you win, Collins agreed. But when I win, she hangs alongside your corpse. They faced each other in the dusty camp, surrounded by smoke and ruin. Somewhere in the distance, someone was crying. A crow called from the rocks above. Jake's hand hovered over his gun, every nerve alive and screaming. Collins moved first, faster than Jake expected. His pistol cleared leather in a practiced draw that spoke of 1,000 fights. But Jake was young and desperate, and desperation added speed. He drew and fired in one motion, not aiming, just pointing and pulling the trigger. Both guns roared together. Jake felt something punch him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He hit the ground hard, his pistol falling from numb fingers. Through the pain and shock, he saw Collins still standing, his gun aimed for a second shot. Then the marshal's eyes widened. He looked down at his chest where a red stain was spreading across his shirt. His gun wavered, then dropped. He sat down heavily in the dust, his face confused. Well, he said quietly, that's unexpected. Katie ran to Jake, her hands pressing against his shoulder wound. The bullet had gone through cleanly, missing bone and major vessels. He would live, though it hurt like hellfire. Collins was not so lucky. The marshal coughed blood and lay back, his eyes staring at the sky. Tell me something, Collins said, his voice fading. Was it worth it? All this death and suffering for money? Jake looked at Katie, at her face streaked with tears and dust and her brother's blood. He thought about the depot manager, the deputies, Pop and Danny, and all the others who had died because they wanted something better than the scraps life offered them. I don't know, he said honestly. Ask me in 10 years. Collins smiled faintly. Won't be around to ask. But I hope you find what you're looking for, Cowboy. I really do. His eyes closed and his breathing stopped. They took 3 horses and rode north, following the trail the families had used. Behind them, the camp burned, and lawmen searched the ruins for gold they would never find. Jake's shoulder throbbed with every step, but Katie had bound it tight, and the bleeding was slowing. They rode for 3 days, avoiding towns and trails, living on hardtack and creek water. On the 4th day, they reached the border and crossed into Mexico. The money was split between their saddlebags, enough to start over somewhere far from here. In a small village near the coast, they bought a cantina with cash and fake names. Jake tended bar while his shoulder healed. Katie kept the books and learned to cook. They did not talk about the past, about the people they had killed or the lives they had destroyed. Some things were better left buried. A year later, Katie found out she was pregnant. They married in a small church, with local villagers as witnesses who knew nothing of their history. The baby was a girl with dark eyes and her mother's fierce spirit. They named her Hope, because that was all they had left. Jake still dreamed sometimes of Collins lying in the dust, of Danny falling on the ridge, of Pop bleeding out by the spring. But when he woke, Katie was there beside him, and their daughter slept peacefully in her crib, and the morning sun streamed through the window of their small home. It was not the life he had imagined when he was young and idealistic, but it was life, purchased at a terrible price and defended with blood and sacrifice. He had chosen to save Katie when she hung suspended between death and life, and that choice had led them through hell to this quiet place. Whether it was redemption or just survival, he could not say, but it was theirs, and that was enough.